Hello there, good evening to you. You are watching BizFirst in Focus. Now, we know from time to time the government intervenes into the market and imposes control prices to control the prices of certain goods, certain essential items. But do these control prices actually work? Do they benefit the people? Do they benefit the retailers or the wholesalers? Or does it benefit anyone? That is what we are going to talk to you about through BizFirst this evening. We are going to talk to Mr. Ravi Ratnasabapathy from Advocata, and we are going to keep you updated about these price controls that are imposed by the government from time to time, especially when the budget for the next year is about to come out. Mr. Ratnasabapathy, thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing with you the research that you and your institute have done to keep the public aware of these things.
Right.
So let's get into it right away. Now, let me, before we go into the details of your findings, the report that you have compiled, let me ask you, Mr. Ratnasabapathy, when you say control prices, we as laymen know what it means from the very shallow perspective, but why does the government actually come in and impose control prices?
Right. What they do is, I believe what they're trying to do is to tell the public that they intend to reduce the cost of living. Now, while the government can actually by law impose a maximum selling price or a minimum selling price on something, they are actually unable to control the economic forces that actually lie underneath. So on the surface they can control the price, but they can't control the forces below. So what sometimes will happen is that depending on where the price level has been set, you will find all sorts of other consequences coming about as a result of the control prices. So yes, so that's the basic issue. Can you really control the cost of living through the system of price controls?
Mr. Ratnasabapathy, now when a government decides to control a price of certain good, they may be imposing the price above the current market price or below the current market price, right above or right below. But when you make that decision, does the government have time to make that decision? Is there research that is involved, or is it a certain decision taken by maybe an official at the Ministry of Finance? How does that happen?
Well, we are not entirely sure. It depends. There are different industries, and we've surveyed, or rather, we've got some people to do a survey of a couple of them. Now, in the case of cement, there is a control price that is set in collaboration with the industry. So the industry gets together. They each manufacturer provides a certain cost breakup and a request for and from time to time, based on their cost, they request a price, the revisions to the control price that is set. So what we found was that the prices that have been set for cement are actually higher than prices in the region. So for similar products in Thailand or Malaysia, the per bag our cement prices are more expensive than the region. So that's probably because industry is involved in setting price. So that's a good example of a price control that isn't really benefiting the public. The other problem is that when you look at construction costs, cement is only a single component. It's about 22% of the average construction cost. On things like steel, the government imposes a huge tax. Rebar steel is taxed at about 89%. So if you look at sand, there are various problems in the market because of the issue of mining. So sand prices also are very volatile and tend to be high. There are solutions to this, like importing sand, which some countries do, but those options are not available here. So as a result of a combination of taxes, because not just on cement, and there's steel taxes, there's taxes on a whole range of other items that go into construction, including sanitary ware, flooring tiles, there's roofing sheets, the electrical fittings, the wiring, all of these, furniture, all of these carry a heavy tax. So construction costs may be as much as 60% higher than Thailand and Malaysia, according to some estimates that an architect had done. So yes, so it's a long answer, but in cement, price controls don't really help the consumer.
Mr. Ratnasabapathy, another factor is if, let's say, someone is to question the Minister of Industry and Commerce or the Minister of Finance, especially when there is a budget coming in. Just before the budget, we see the prices of certain goods being increased by the government or new taxes being imposed on certain goods. And then right after, when the budget is announced, we see that those products are sometimes the value, the tax component or the price is reduced. It's like telling the people, okay, we are increasing it now, we'll increase it through the decrease it through the budget, sort of. That's like the message that they are trying to get out. But is that productive to economy? Is that what is happening? And if so, is that productive to the economy?
Tax rates should generally be stable, and yeah, something that you see, if and they should be clear. People shouldn't have to look at the budget every year. In most countries, the budget is a non-event. You know, people aren't trying to decipher what the finance minister is going to say. It's just a presentation of expenditure. What usually happens is that most countries would work with what is called a medium-term expenditure framework. It's not an annual process, but a 3-year or a 5-year rolling forecast that they work on. So they work out based on existing tax structures what your revenue is going to be. They set a target for the maximum deficit or the total expenditure and then work within that. So they try to work within fixed expenditure limits. So there is unless there is some significant change, you don't need to keep revising, because you've planned your tax revenue, you've planned your tax rates. You just need to forecast where your expenditure is going and try to manage within that, so that then there's some predictability for businesses and for households, because people actually, even households plan their expenses in a certain way. You suddenly find that the withholding taxes have changed or the income tax rates goes up. Suddenly your household budget is also out of kilter. So ideally, if you plan properly and don't do a lot of ad hoc announcements on pre-election spending or populist spending, all of which is controlled if you get into these longer term frameworks that are rigidly applied, so that ministers can't just make announcements. They have to, there's a process for introducing a new spending item, and therefore that keeps the overall financials within a sensible sort of proportion, so you don't have silly things happening.
Mr. Ratnasabapathy, with that we have to go in for a short commercial break. We will delve deeper into the findings of Advocata when we come back in terms of the price control. Stay with us. You're watching Biz First in Focus. Welcome back to the show. You are watching Biz First in Focus. We are in discussion with Mr. Ravi Ratnasabapathy from Advocata about the price controls that are imposed, especially when the budget for the next year is coming up. Are these price controls that are imposed working? We have Mr. Ratnasabapathy with you the details and the report that you have compiled, and Advocata, your institute, has compiled. I think our producer can put up certain slides from the research that you have documented to give us an example as to what you're trying to talk about here.
Right.
Let's have a look at the first slide that we have. This is from the initial findings that you have. If you can explain to me what I'm seeing here, Mr. Ratnasabapathy.
Right. What you see on the red line is the control price. This was for Nadu rice that was imposed 74 rupees a kilo. A price control price was imposed on the 26th of December. So if you can see from the actual selling price is on the green line. So it was somewhere about 100 odd rupees, and it came down a little bit, but it was consistently higher than the control price. To go back a little bit, what we were trying to do was to try and understand, okay, because last year the government imposed it on a number of groceries, so we were trying to see how these were actually working in practice. What we did was we went to the Consumer Affairs Authority website and tried to get a list of prices. Unfortunately, there were none available. There were a few prices, but they were outdated.
Aren't they the people who are supposed to maintain the control?
Yes, they are the people who actually control or impose or monitor and are supposed to manage the price control. But like a lot of government websites, unfortunately, the information that's on it is outdated. So then we rang them and tried to get a list of control prices, and unfortunately, they didn't have that either. So finally, we visited their office and went through all the gazette notifications and compiled a list. So then we compared those prices that we got with the prices that were surveyed by the Department of Census and Statistics in their weekly survey of the main markets in Colombo.
Right.
So this is the average price of the main markets, not the supermarkets, the main markets, and we just compared it with this. So that's Nadu rice. So if you just move on to the next slide, this was coconuts. Now the DCS survey has coconuts that are large, medium, small and average. So there's a control price of 75 rupees a nut, but they haven't specified which kind of nut. So what we've done is we've compared it against an average price. The large nuts are always much higher than this, and the small ones were always within the control price. So you were not sure what they were trying to control, but we compared it with the average.
But these are examples without any tax imposed on these.
No, there are not taxes as such. But if you notice, the red line is below, and the blue line is the market price, which is generally, sometimes it coincides, but most of the time it's above. It's never below. That was also imposed in December last year. If you move on to the next one, that's dal. So again, you see the red line is the control price, and the blue line is the actual market price.
We see a reduction in the control price as well, from 160 to 130 in December of last year.
Yes, but and although the actual market price falls, there's another reason for that. It will be clear in one of the other slides. But we have the again the price that's it's retailing at is much higher than the control price. If we just move on to the next slide. This is dry fish, a variety called katta. So again, you've seen the control
nowhere close to
the control price. And in fact, the control price was reduced and the market prices actually went up, which was
Mr. Ratnasabhapati, here I have to ask you a question. Now we went through 4 examples, but in those 4 examples, the control price was at one level and the market price was actually higher at all instances. So isn't that a problem that is directed at the Consumer Affairs Authority? Because if the Consumer Affairs Authority is the authority that is responsible to monitor this, then haven't they been, have they shown a blind eye towards this, or have they not done their job properly, or what has gone wrong?
They are trying to impose the prices. If you look at the annual report, I think last year they had done 25,000 raids on retail outlets. The previous year it was about 22,000. But if you look at the actual number of the retail outlets, if you take the more formalized ones, there are supposed to be about 205,000, right? 205,000 retail outlets. If you are going to monitor these prices, you are going to have to maybe inspect these every couple of months. They've done 20,000 raids, so 10% of the outlets, and that's just once a year. So probably they don't have the resources, and of course the sensible way to go about it would be to publish the set of control prices, ensure that every outlet displays this, and then ask the buyers to complain, or the consumers to complain if prices are being sold at prices above. But what you would likely see is that then you would find that at the moment you don't see the problems that control prices can do. You might see shortages, queues. That's what you usually expect to see, but you don't see that, and probably the reason you don't see that is because the prices are not really being followed. So you may, if you do it properly, you can probably bring the prices down, but then you might find with it the shortages, because what happens is price is actually a form of it's a signal, and it what it does is ration out what's available, because people will needs or wants are unlimited, what's available is limited. So price is a way of rationing it out. So what would happen if the price were to drop? Would that the demand would probably go up, and then you'd find that there's not enough to satisfy the market. So then you'd find the shortage coming in. So you don't see that happening at the moment, because the prices don't get followed.
With that, Mr. Ratsabapati, we had to go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll have more on the report done by Advocata on the control prices, and we are going to also talk about what the black market here in Sri Lanka is about. Stay tuned. You are watching BizFirst in Focus. Welcome back to the show. Before we went into the break, we spoke about 4 examples that Advocata research has found out about the control prices in Sri Lanka. Before we go into the other findings of this detailed report, I want to ask Mr. Ratnasabapati a question about the practicality of this when a tax component is added. Now, yes, we saw 4 examples as to where the control price is and the retail market price is. But when the tax component is added to this, it becomes a bit tricky for the retailers, the market, as well as the government, and all in all the end consumer as well. So we have here an example, I think our producer can put it up on the screen, about bee onions in the country from November. This is the situation, and the yellow color line, I think, is the tax component, Mr.
Yes,
Ratsabapati?
that's right. If you that's plotted on the right hand side scale. Now the bee onion, which is retailing at about 100 and it was at about 150 rupees, that carried an import tax of 40 rupees a kilo, right? That's not a small amount, almost 30% of the price. So last year in the budget, following some other reports we did on taxes on food, you'll notice the control price is in red at the bottom. You've got the blue line, which is the market price, and the yellow line plotted on the right hand side scale, which is the tax. In the budget they cut it, so then the tax went down to about 1 rupee or something, and then you see the blue line slowly falling down. So then it came down until April, when they went and increased the tax back up again to 40 rupees a kilo. So then you find the blue line creeping up again, and it doesn't follow the control price.
So here, Mr. Ratsabapati, a question arises as to about the practicality of this control price. If they don't impose a control price and just bring the tax down, then there won't be an issue here.
Yes, exactly. The one of the problems is that we have a lot of taxes on both on food items and also on other consumer items. These are the things that keep your cost of living very high. So Bombay onions have this tax, a lot of other items have them as well, and as well as not just food, all of your consumer, your shampoos, soap, toiletries, school supplies, all of these carry very heavy taxes. So we are working on some other reports that try to highlight these things, but government taxes are what are one of the problems that are keeping consumer prices and food prices high. Other ones are bad, certain bad policies. So so there's more, I think, if you look at the next slide. This is potatoes, again carrying a tax of 40 rupees a kilo. The potato that retails at 120 odd rupees, the control price is 115, I believe, carries a tax of 40 rupees. So that's again another 30% tax virtually on the selling price, and much more on the import price. So the green line is the is the market price. The yellow line plotted against the right hand side scale is the tax. Again, you see in the budget the tax is cut, and then the green line immediately drops below the control price and the prices keep falling. Then in February they impose a 30 rupee a kilo tax, and the green line starts moving up. Then in May it becomes 40 rupees a kilo, and it moves still further and it goes up beyond the control price. So again, taxes probably play a much bigger role in influencing in consumer prices than the actual control price.
Mr. Rathasabapathy, I think when it comes to the Sri Lankan market, even though a lot of people go on to the market to buy their daily needs, this control price that is imposed, is anything above the control price considered to be black market price?
It's technically illegal, and what would happen is that when the Consumer Affairs Authority raids, which they do, they've done 20,000, they impose a fine on the retailer. And what usually there was a survey that an organization carried out amongst the traders. The fines are fairly small, some 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, so they just pay the fine and they carry on. So it's not they don't need to bribe the Consumer Affairs Authority. The fine is small enough to pay, so they just pay the fine and they carry on.
Here, Mr. Rathasabapathy, in this same example, when you say the control price is at 115 rupees and the tax component is at 40 and then drops to about 1 rupee and then goes back up, does that mean, so the margin the retailer receives is very small? So the practicality question is what I'm trying to get at all this time. Even in the first few examples, we saw a bit of an impractical nature when it comes to this control price and the tax component. When the government decides to impose a control price, do they have the adequate knowledge, the research to say this is how much we are imposing, and based on this reason to avoid issues like this? Because we see as soon as the taxes drop, the market price also drops with it.
Yes,
so
that's right.
What is the point of putting a control price?
Yes, that I think it makes the politicians feel good that you have done, and you can tell the public that we have imposed the price control and we are helping you to reduce your cost of living. But unfortunately, that is not true. At least for these items that we've surveyed, imposing the price control hasn't really helped.
We have one more slide, I think, with another example on how this affects. This is once again dal.
Yes.
Control price versus the retail price. Again, we see the control price being below the current retail price.
Yes, yes. And also the tax. Now, dal also used to attract a tax of 40 rupees. But last year they had brought the tax down to 15 rupees, which is the yellow line, and that was cut in the budget to 1 rupee. So there you see the red line, which is the control price. When the tax was cut, they cut the control price. The blue line, which is the market price, did in fact come down with the tax cut, but didn't really go below the control price. So the problem is that when the government resorts to this ad hoc type changes in taxes, it prevents the market from operating properly. For example, when we were talking to a supermarket, they had been trying to bring down dal or sugar, I believe, to get into long-term supply agreements and to bring down and thereby get better prices and bring it down. So unfortunately, they had got into a contract, and then in between a month or two later, the government had changed the tax, and the whole it was not viable. So then they had to at enormous cost to themselves and to the supplier, they had to try to break those agreements. So the problem when you have ad hoc policies that keep changing frequently, it prevents people from getting into proper long-term supply agreements, and it disrupts. So everybody takes on this mentality of the trader trying to go, buy something at the cheapest possible price, bring it down as quickly as possible and sell it off without trying to actually manage a supply relationship. Usually businesses would have longer term relationships with suppliers, and therefore you might be able to work out better prices. So all of this sort of impedes, it becomes a very transactional sort of operation that takes place.
Thank you, Mr. Ratnasabapathy, for bringing us the details about the control prices here in Sri Lanka and the research that you have done together with Advocata, the institute that you represent, and it was indeed very helpful for the people to understand how the price controls work and how the tax component comes into effect with the 7 examples that we had for you. So that's all we have for you from Biz in Focus this evening. It was a pleasure to have you. We'll join you next week, same time, same place. I've been Saturanga Hapuarachi.
Thank you.